Thoughts in general as far as how to move forward. Obviously, there's, I think clearly there were violations that occurred. I think there's some issues we need to work through with how to move forward. I'm inclined to at a minimum remand this to the executive director to look at a number of issues. I wanted to get some of your thoughts on that and see if we can provide some direction in that regard.
Yeah, just some preliminary thoughts. First, I want to thank all the stakeholders for being here today. That's helpful for us. I also want to compliment staff on what is normally excellent work. I do think in this case we wandered off the path a little bit, and so I also support a remand, just as sort of a kind of initial thoughts on where we are. Now, exactly what sort of instruction we might give staff on remand is getting into the weeds, and I think I would not want to be too prescriptive, but I'm sensitive to the fact that Addison is a small town. I compliment them on the development. It looks lovely. But I'm troubled by what I see as willful noncompliance with our statutes and regulations and the terms of the permit. And I agree that the proposed penalty is too low. And, we can get into the weeds on why that is. Perhaps if y'all think that's constructive or...
I think it may be. I agree with your assessment that we probably don't need to be overly prescriptive, because I think there's going to be some issues that are better resolved through that remand process. But I think it'd be appropriate for us to point out some of those concerns we have. I think some of those overarching issues that maybe you're sort of speaking to is we do need to maintain the effectiveness and compliance with our permits, and so there's certainly issues there that need to be considered. We also have a responsibility to make sure that we consider evidence as we look for moving forward with assessing penalties and violations. And so there may be issues, and I see many in this, where there are things that may have happened, likely happened, and I think staff needs to carefully evaluate what things there's evidence to prove to make sure that we're true to our requirements and our obligation to make sure we have evidential-based enforcement activities occurring. And so I think a couple things I'll throw out, and maybe there'll be some others that you can comment to that I think are important. One, if we look at, with regard to violation one and the failure to obtain authorization prior to beginning construction, the violation description and the use of the programmatic matrix suggests that the violation is a failure to obtain a permit prior to beginning construction. The data cited and other factors that just may require enhancement suggests that the violation is for an unauthorized impoundment of state water. I think both of those occurred at separate date ranges, and so that complicates things some, but nonetheless I think that would be appropriate for us to look at citing those separately. Specifically looking at the violation for the unauthorized impoundment of state water. State water was actually impounded. I think there's evidence that appears there was actual harm that occurred based on the evidence that we've seen as a result that occurred as a result of this violation, especially given that this unauthorized impoundment occurred during the time of the drought. I think that photographic evidence that contained in the 2014 investigation report shows the impounding of state water as early as March 31st of 2011. Additionally, respondents' response to a comment letter dated December 8th of 2016 admits that the TCQ did document that state water was impounded on March 31st of 2011, largely due to a rain event. Authorization to impound was not issued until May 20th of 2011, when amended water right 538.3A was issued. So a 200% enhancement for an unauthorized impoundment during moderate drought conditions appears appropriate. With the violation for failure to obtain authorization prior to beginning construction, based on the respondent's October 6, 2014 letter to the investigator and respondent's response to the comment letter, construction activities began by at least December of 2010 and continued until at least August 15th of 2012.
And let me pause right there.
Sure.
If we can. There may be evidence to suggest an earlier date. OPIC cited the September 2010 date, so I don't want to
And I'm glad you brought that up.
I wouldn't want to tie the ED's hands as they look at the duration of the violation, just to consider all the evidence.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because that is a good point, because, and my intention was that it appears that a minimum that these date ranges are there, and I'm certainly would agree with you that the executive director should not be constrained if there's evidence in the record that shows that those date ranges should be expanded. So I think it's a valid point, and I thank you for making that point.
And I would also welcome I too am for a remand. I think what I would say is I would like to provide some prescription to the ED, and it sounds like, Chairman, you're doing that, but also I would offer what OPIC presented, the ED should take that into consideration as well with what we give them. That'd be, I would welcome that.
Yeah, and I think maybe another way of saying that is we're not intending to artificially limit what the executive director can consider based on what information is provided that's appropriate to be considered in this matter. So, yeah, I think that's another valid point. And my intention is that these points are sort of a minimum of what we're looking at that appears to be addressed. And obviously, if ED finds something that differs from what I'm prescribing as well, I welcome them to look at that. These are just some things I definitely want them to put fresh eyes on, and so I think that's helpful. So thank you for those comments. In any event, Addison did not receive authorization until May 20th of 2011 when they received their amended water right. The categorization of this violation as programmatic major violation looks to be appropriate.
And Chairman, could I jump in real quick?
Sure.
The first violation you laid out, I think, is probably better suited to fall under the environmental property and human health matrix, not the programmatic matrix, as I understand it, causing actual harm in a time of drought.
I think that's accurate as well. And again, I would leave that to the executive director to see where best fits that, but that would be my understanding as well, Commissioner. With regard to the good faith reduction, a good faith effort to comply, reduction, so to get that reduction, it's appropriate when a respondent has made efforts to come into compliance within the time frames provided in the penalty policy. So just stating the obvious there, this respondent made no effort to come into compliance, but found itself in compliance when the permit was issued. And so I think a good faith reduction is not appropriate under this fact pattern, because they didn't make a change in order to come into compliance. They just basically reissued the permit, and that led to compliance. So
I agree.
Okay. Violation 2, the failure to maintain a Trinity Aquifer groundwater well. I think that actual harm may have occurred, and I encourage the executive director to look into that. While the respondent's Woodbine Aquifer groundwater meets the Texas water quality standards when commingled with surface water, the October 2014 investigation report states that the October 8, 2014 sampling of well water did not meet the water quality standards. The respondent's October 6, 2014 letter and the 2014 investigation report both show the groundwater from the Woodbine Aquifer that has been used as makeup water since at least August 1st, 2012. Based on sampling, this groundwater has actually introduced pollutants to state surface water, even if only in insignificant amounts. The evidence supports the conclusion that actual minor harm occurred based on that evidence, is my opinion. The dates for the violation. The permit requires that the respondent maintain a groundwater well in the Trinity Aquifer. This requirement was imposed on the date of issuance, which was May 20th of 2011. The respondent's letter of October 6, 2014 states that the Woodbine Aquifer groundwater well was first used on August 1st of 2012. The first day of this violation is at least May 20th, 2011, and no later than August 1st of 2012. As of today, the respondent has still not complied with this violation. The end date of this violation should be the screening date, according to our policy and the approach we've used, of February 2nd, 2015, in which the agency evaluated the violation. With regard to respondent's reliance on staff's instruction, the respondent submitted a letter on February 7th of 2013 requesting to change the groundwater well from the Trinity Aquifer to the Woodbine Aquifer. The respondent alleges in that letter that TCQ staff verbally told Addison's consultant, Keith Bradley, that the February 7, 2013 letter would be sufficient to change aquifers and that a change to the language was not required. It is the responsibility of an individual to know the law and to take those measures necessary to legally amend permit requirements. It appears that the respondent did not perform its due diligence regarding this violation. Nonetheless, I would like the ED to examine this issue and determine what, if any part, false instruction from TCQ had in this violation. Based on this review, the ED should make adjustments to the penalty as he deems appropriate, if any.
I agree with that. If I could just interject,
Please.
I think if a TCQ staff person gave incorrect advice, shame on us, and we need to do a better job of customer service if that happened. But we can't let a letter from a regulated entity supersede a permit condition.
Agreed.
So my view is that there is a violation here. Whether we give some consideration on the penalty amount based on inaccurate advice that we may or may not have given is another question. So again, I encourage the ED to look at that.
I concur wholeheartedly, and I think the issue, obviously, we need to continually make sure that we're making every effort to provide proper advice, and in the event that this did happen, that does not, as you pointed out, does not supersede the permit requirements. So I agree with that point. With regard to violation number 3, the failure to supplement the reservoirs with groundwater. Dates for this violation: the requirement was imposed by the permit, which was issued May 20th, 2011. No makeup water was used until the groundwater well was first used on August 1st of 2012, as indicated by the respondent's letter dated October 6th of 2014. The executive director should use those 2 dates as a starting point for determining what dates to use for the beginning and end of this violation.
I'm sorry, Chairman, could you repeat that?
Basically, we have the key points. The permit was first imposed on May 20th of 2011. No makeup water was used until the well was first used, which was August 1st of 2012, based on the respondent's indications. So August 1st, 2012 is the first time they used makeup water, and the ED should use that date and the date of the permit being issued to determine the starting point and end point for that violation. In other words, that data suggests at least a minimum range when there was a failure to use makeup water from an aquifer.
Okay. I read that special condition a little differently.
Okay.
I read it as an obligation to use makeup water from the Trinity aquifer, and maybe reasonable people can differ on this point, and I would just point that out to the ED staff. They can parse the language and decide what they think the appropriate reading of their special condition is, but I would take the view, I think, that until they supply makeup water from the Trinity aquifer, or until their permit is amended, that they remain out of compliance with that particular provision.
And I don't necessarily disagree. I guess maybe that's a good question to delve into more and ask the ED to take the first look at that, because I had sort of looked at that as the aquifer selection was one violation, and then the lack of makeup water was another. I guess I will say I'm not planning to preclude the executive director from looking at determining whether or not that water also fails to meet that requirement. Even though there was water there, it was not from the prescribed source. So, Commissioner Baker, maybe we provide additional leeway for the executive director to look at whether that violation range changes, because in your estimation, you're suggesting that perhaps the fact that they started pumping water on August 1st of 2012 did nothing to alleviate their requirement to provide makeup water from the aquifer that was specified in the permit.
That's how I read the condition. I realize that people might read it differently, and I wouldn't want to tie the executive director's hands on remand, but I wanted to point that out and just ask them to consider that.
That's
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chairman, I read it like you do, as 2 separate violations, but
And I would ask,
I'm fine with leaving that open for their interpretation.
right, and I would ask the executive director, as you look at that, to look at that both from the standpoint of what the requirements are and what our agency practice has been, if there is a history on that, and if not, certainly I would be interested when this comes back at understanding the implications of why your recommendation is the way it is with regard to that penalty. Is that appropriate?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. With regard to actual or potential harm, the categorization of this violation as a potential minor violation seems appropriate in this instant, but I would like the ED to re-examine this after considering the entire record. So I think that's, again, not trying to preclude the executive director from making that evaluation. With regard to violation number 4, the failure to maintain a riparian buffer zone, The dates for the violation requirement was imposed by the permit, which again was issued on May 20th, 2011. As of today, the respondent has still not complied with this violation. The end date of this violation should again be the screening date due to our practice of February 2nd, 2015. With regard to actual potential harm, the categorization of this violation as a potential minor violation seems appropriate in this instance. But again, we'd be interested in seeing either your opinions and/or see what the executive director assesses with further reflection on the matter before us.
Yeah, for me, it's an open question as to whether it's potential or actual.
Okay. So those are, maybe that provides some direction, and maybe it more provides an indication of how broadly that we're interested in having the executive director to look at reassessing the violations and the penalties associated with this matter. Are there thoughts on that? I'm not interested in getting into the specific penalty results because I think there's a lot of open questions that would still lead to that. But certainly I think it's appropriate for us, as we seem to have agreed to remand this back to the executive director and allow them to take another look at this. My interest is getting at a protection and understanding that our permits mean something, and ensuring that that is all the purpose of our enforcement in general is to ensure that compliance is encouraged. And so I'm hopeful that we can come away with this in a process that protects the integrity of our permitting process, as well as while we want to work and recognize that, as you pointed out, it is a small, relatively small community, but at the same time we have to make sure that we're providing for and providing and ensuring the integrity of our programs as we move forward. So hopefully this remand will provide opportunity for that to be ensured.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just add a little bit more, I view this as really a redo from top to bottom, so reevaluate from the beginning to the end, and let's make sure we're identifying the correct violations, characterizing them correctly, classifying them correctly, that we're comfortable that the evidence supports the duration of those violations. Look again at whether a 1660 order is appropriate. Let's look again at our ordering provisions and basically start from square one, given the squishy guidance we've provided or the wide lanes we've provided. That's really how I'm viewing this exercise.
I'm wondering if there's any obvious questions maybe that the executive director has on this guidance that we've given that it may be helpful for us to ask, if there seems to be at least an understanding of how to go forward in addressing this issue. Seeing no, I'm going to assume silence means that you'll work with what we've given you, and we look forward to hearing back from you on that. Other thoughts, considerations, commissioners?
No, Chairman, I think you did a great job in identifying the issues that I came across, and then Commissioner rolling in some of the broader themes that you talked about. I agree with that as well, and I'm prepared to make a motion.
Great. I'm prepared. Would entertain that motion. Please proceed.
Chairman Shaw, Commissioner Neerman, I move that we adopt items 6 through 44 as recommended today by the Executive Director, and remand item 45 to the Executive Director for reconsideration, utilizing the direction the Commission has given here today.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Staff look forward to your work on that. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate your participation, and we look forward to a successful resolution of this issue. So thank you all.